Hello guys, and welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be ranking every single defensive pairing in the NHL. I'm so excited to get this series done with. I have already done this with goaltending tandems, with first lines, and now I'm going to be closing it off right here, right now. So let's get straight into it, starting off with number 32 and the team that I think has the worst defensive pairing in the NHL. And at number 32, I have the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens right now have a defensive pairing of Jordan Harris and David Savard, and you might be asking yourself, who's Jordan Harris? I asked myself the exact same thing. Jordan Harris is a defenseman who played in the NCAA, I think actually this season and last season, and he's just decided to come into the NHL and be on the first pairing. And he's only played one game, so I have no idea why he's here. Maybe someday he could be a good NHL defenseman, but I can't even say that because he's played one game. Like, he's not a first pairing defenseman, and that's obvious. And on the other hand, you got Savard, and Savard I do think is a solid defenseman, having a fine year. You know, his defensive stats may not look great, but he's also on a horrible team this year. So, but definitely not a first pairing defenseman. Montreal being as bad as they are, it's quite expected they have the worst defensive pairing in the league. But now moving on to number 31, and a team that some thought would be a playoff team at the start of the year. That's not right. That's very wrong. But it is the Chicago Blackhawks. And the Chicago Blackhawks right now have a first pairing of Jake McCabe and Caleb Jones. Jake McCabe does put up some decent points. Not a very good defensive game. I've watched some of his games, especially ones against the Oilers, but I've seen a few Chicago games, and I don't know. I'm not a big Jake McCabe guy. I don't think his defensive game is very good, and the offensive numbers that he puts up, I don't think they quite make up for that lack in the defensive area. And Caleb Jones, obviously very familiar with Caleb Jones as well, but Caleb Jones, I think he's a solid defenseman, you know, a guy who could be on your third pairing, but not a first pairing defenseman. I know Seth Jones isn't on their first pairing, I guess, but yeah, that's how Daily Faceoff says, and the way this video goes. But now on to number 30, and in the 30th spot of the defensive pairing rankings, I have the Ottawa Senators. The Ottawa Senators have a first defensive pairing of Erik Brannstrom and Artem Zub. Erik Brannstrom, I'm not a big fan of as well. Usually with these bottom teams, there's going to be one defenseman who I'm really not a fan of and don't think they should be there. But again, with Erik Brannstrom, it's not that he's like not going to be, it's just that he isn't right now. He's had poor defensive numbers, poor offensive numbers, and he's only 22 though. So I think I should highlight that, is that he's still young. He could get much better. But Artem Zub, on the other hand, I think he's had a pretty solid year and has definitely been a solid top four defenseman on an average NHL team. I think he'd be a solid top four defenseman, but not a top pairing defenseman. And as a whole, Ottawa, a team that's still trying to come out of a rebuild, definitely need to fix their defense. Although it will be fixed. You know, they've got what's his name? Thomas Chabot's on that team, and he's not. I think he's injured actually, so that definitely hurts his first pairing. And also they got Jake Sanderson going to come in, so we'll see how he does. I'll find that pretty interesting. But now on to number 29, and coming in at number 29 is the Philadelphia Flyers, who have a first defensive pairing of Ivan Provorov and Cam York. Cam York, a young defenseman trying to learn the ways of the league. He is only 21, so yeah, very young. I believe it's his first legitimate season in the NHL, and not really legitimate. Like, he's only played 26 games, and honestly, he hasn't been terrible in those games. Like, his plus minus may not be good, but that's because he is on a not good team, and his defensive numbers, I don't think he's looked that bad, honestly. And his offensive numbers, he's been able to put up a few. And Provorov, he had a good season a few years ago, and he just has never been able to get it back. And this season, it's been okay. He's been about as expected, but yeah, overall, as a first defensive pairing, I just think it's one of the bottom in the league. But now moving on to number 28, and this defensive pairing is very much hurt by the fact that they have a major injury, and that is the LA Kings. The LA Kings right now have a first pairing of Tobias Bjornfot and Sean Durzi, and obviously I have to point out the fact that Drew Doughty is injured right now. But Tobias Bjornfot, another young defenseman on this list who, again, maybe someday could turn into a solid guy. But this year, not really doing much offensively, and you know, he's like a third pairing guy right now, maybe a seventh defenseman, and shouldn't be on the first pairing. But again, Drew Doughty being hurt impacts this defensive pairing a lot. And then you got Sean Durzi. Sean Durzi, I really like Sean Durzi, and he's definitely broken out into a very good top four defenseman this year. And honestly, I think he's fine on the first pairing if you have like a guy like Drew Doughty with him. I don't know exactly if Sean Durzi is normally with Drew Doughty. But either way, this defensive pairing right now is definitely not one of the top in the league, and they need Drew Doughty back before the playoffs, which he should be back, right? I think he'll be back. But now on to number 20 27. And on the 27th spot of this ranking, I have the Anaheim Ducks, who trading out Hampus Lindholm and Josh Manson has definitely hurt their defense overall, but Hampus Lindholm especially, as I believe he was on that first pairing. And now their first pairing looks like Cam Fowler and Jamie Drysdale. And this is a defensive pairing that could look very good in just a couple years. Cam Fowler, although he is getting to a little bit of the older side, I think he's in his 30s now, he's been having a pretty solid year for himself, especially offensively. And Jamie Drysdale, not a bad defense offensively this season, but his defensive numbers have just not been good. And that's typically how you'll see it. Like, this guy, he's only 19 years old, so I can't be too hard on him. He's being asked a lot at a very young age, and it almost makes me wonder, like, are the Ducks rushing him? Should he be having less ice time, maybe more chance in the AHL, although he has proven himself at the NHL level? Yeah, I don't know. His defensive numbers just have not looked good. And overall, Anaheim also hurt by the trade deadline, because I did the other rankings before the trade deadline. Trade deadline has impacted these rankings for sure, and that will be noticed in Boston actually as well. Boston is a lot higher than they would have been if I did this prior to the trade deadline. But Anaheim finds themselves at number 27. But now on to the number 26 spot, and the team at number 26, I have the Detroit Red Wings. The Detroit Red Wings have half of an amazing defensive pairing. Maurice Seider is that half. The not half is Dan Dekeyser, whatever you want to say. Dekeyser this year has been a pretty rough year offensively and defensively, and watching him in the few games that I have, a small sample size again, but his defensive game has just looked very rough, and I think Detroit lets him go in the offseason because I believe he is on an expiring contract. But why don't we go to the other hand? Maurice Seider, fantastic defenseman, could win the Calder. Many will argue should win the Calder because he has been, like, maybe he's not putting up as many offensive numbers, but then again, he's a defenseman and a very solid defenseman at that. And you will tell by his underlying defensive numbers, his defensive numbers, everything tells you that this guy is a solid defenseman. And he is only at the age of 20. And they still got Simone Evanson coming up. In a couple years, this defensive pairing, if I do this ranking again, could be very high. But as for right now, Danny Dekeyser drags it down to number 26, in my opinion. But now on to number 25. And at number 25 is one that you guys might think that I actually have a little bit too low, and that is the San Jose Sharks. The San Jose Sharks right now have Jacob Magna and Brent Burns as their top pairing, and Brent Burns really having a pretty good bounce-back season from last year. Last year, not that it was a horrible season, but it definitely wasn't as expected. And Brent Burns, he's getting up there. You know, he's 37 now. He's slowing down, should be slowing down, but honestly, he's kept a pretty good pace and has played pretty solid defensively this season. And on the other hand, you got Jacob Magna. Magna not really gonna amaze you with his offensive numbers, but his defense definitely isn't bad. And a guy I don't think should be on your first pairing, maybe like a third pairing. But overall, as a pairing, they managed, I guess, 25th in my opinion. If you guys think they should be higher, let me know, but I had them at 25th. But now on to number 24, and the 24th team in this defensive ranking, first pairing defensive ranking, I have the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken right now, first defensive pairing is Vince Dunn and Adam Larsson. Adam Larsson, I must say, I am very familiar with, again, the Oiler guys. I do watch all their games. I'm an Oiler fan. I think I've stated that in every video, but Larsson having a pretty solid year offensively, actually. But what's kind of odd is his defensive numbers have not been as good as they usually were. Like, back when he was on the Oilers, his offensive numbers didn't look good at all, but you'd have to watch to realize that he is very good defensively. And Adam Larsson this year, it's kind of flipped a little bit. His defensive numbers haven't been as great, but he has managed to put up some offensive numbers. And on the other hand, you got Vince Dunn from St. Louis, and when they made this pick, I didn't understand it very much. You know, Vince Dunn, you could have had Tarasenko, traded him out for assets, and honestly, to this day, I probably still would have done that instead if I was Seattle at the expansion draft. But Vince Dunn has turned out to be a pretty solid defenseman, having a pretty good year for them. But overall, these two defensemen just being solid, okay defensemen. Adam Larsson on a bit of a down year. They get dropped a little bit and, you know, down to 24, as they're both having pretty rough time defensively in their own end. But their team is also not, their whole team is having a pretty rough time in the defensive end. Yeah, they've been better lately, though. They won their last couple games. I think they beat Dallas 4-1 last night, so that's something, I guess. Pretty good defensively there. But now moving on to number 23, and at number 23, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Columbus Blue Jackets have a defensive pairing of Vladislav Gavrikov and Andrew Peeke. Andrew Peeke, I do not think he is a first pairing defenseman. I say that with almost every defenseman at the bottom. They usually have one defenseman that I can clearly state he should not be in the top pairing. And Andrew Peeke, in this case, is that guy. He's been fine. Again, not a guy I think is a bad defenseman, but not a first pairing defenseman. And on the other hand, Vladislav Gavrikov is having a pretty good year for himself, actually. A breakout year for him, especially offensively, where he's managed to put up 30 points in 67 games, which is pretty impressive for Gavrikov. And his defensive numbers also look pretty good. So Columbus managing to find their way to 23rd. But now moving on to 22nd. And at number 22, I have the Vancouver Canucks. Vancouver Canucks' first pairing is Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Tyler Myers. And both these guys getting up there in age, both of them on very expensive contracts. So you could actually give Vancouver a title here for the most overpaid top pairing defense in the NHL. I had to think about that for some reason for a second there. But both these guys' offensive numbers have dipped drastically. But the odd thing is their defense has been very good. Like Tyler Myers, his offense, and he may not be living up to his contract, he never will, but his offense has dropped off a bit since last year, but that defense has been much more solid than it was last year, and that's sort of same thing with Oliver Ekman-Larsson, where his offense has gone down and his defense has gone up. But yeah, at the end of the day, I have Vancouver at 23rd. But now on to 22nd I had Vancouver up. But now on to 21st, and at 21st is the team that traded for Vancouver, and that is the Arizona Coyotes. Now, some of you may argue that they should be lower, but Arizona's first pairing right now is Shane Gostisbehere and Dyson Mayo. And Shane Gostisbehere is having a very good year, and I think a underrated year. Now, I don't think he's gotten as much attention as he should have. But Gostisbehere, let me just read his points and stuff. 69 games, 11 goals, 32 assists for 43 points. A very solid offensive bounce back year. But what's also good with Gostisbehere is he's really found his game defensively in Arizona. And I don't know if it's with him getting more opportunity or what it is. Maybe it's the more pressure on him because they're just such a bad team. But whatever it is, Gostisbehere's definitely found his game in Arizona. And on the other hand, you got Dyson Mayo, who, again, I'll say it again, like, he should not be a first pairing defenseman. But honestly, as a whole, this pairing, I don't hate it. And for a team that's pretty bad in Arizona, I do think that they have a better first pairing than you'd expect from a team that's as low in the standings as they are. But now on to number 20. So cracking the top 20, and again, one that you might think I have too low, and I might think I have too low. But it is the St. Louis Blues. And the St. Louis Blues right now have Marco Scandella with Colton Parayko. And Colton Parayko having a pretty average year for himself. Parayko not known for his offensive numbers, known for being a pretty good defensive defenseman. That's pretty much exactly what he's done this year. And Marco Scandella, he's fine. Again, not first pairing level, but as a whole, as a defensive pairing, it's a first pairing defense. It's fine, it's okay. And the thing with St. Louis is they may not have a stellar first pairing defense, but they do have very good defensive depth. So I'm not gonna get too mad about them being at number 20, but I just don't think that they have a stud first pairing defense. But now on to number 19, a team. We go from a team that I think you guys may think I have too low to a team that I think is too high, because some of you may be like, where is Buffalo? Well, Buffalo ends up being right here. Buffalo right now has a defensive pairing of Rasmus Dahlin and Henri Jokiharju, and this is the youngest defensive pairing on this entire list. Rasmus Dahlin coming at only 21 and Jokiharju at 22. And this defensive pairing, if both these guys can become better, progress, which they should, they're still very young, especially Dahlin. Dahlin has a boatload of potential that I still think can be tapped into. Then these guys could really end up being a solid first defensive pairing, like a very good one in the future. But then you also have to think about Owen Power, and then he'll come in and probably be on the first pairing. But that's besides the point. But right now, Rasmus Dahlin putting up some pretty good offensive numbers. The defense obviously is a struggle, but then Jokiharju, on the other hand, has not put up the offensive numbers, but pretty good defensively. So overall, you combine the two, and it works to a decent amount, and has definitely helped Buffalo win some games. I think Henri Jokiharju's done a good job of helping fix some of the problems that Rasmus Dahlin causes, because Rasmus Dahlin isn't the greatest defensively, but as he gets older and develops more, I think that will come. But now on to number 18, and a team that is doing meh this year, and a team that also has a meh first defensive pairing, and that is the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets first defensive pairing is Josh Morrissey and who's that? Dylan DeMello. Josh Morrissey having a pretty solid year after a couple of maybe below average years, or at least last year being a below average year. But overall, his defensive numbers have been fine, and he's managed to put up some pretty good offensive numbers, while Dylan DeMello is being pretty much what you traded for. That defenseman, this is a fine. I don't think it's a great first pairing. But, it's there. That's really all I have to say. There's not much to say with the Winnipeg Jets first pairing. But there is on the 17th number first pairing, and that is the New Jersey Devils. The New Jersey Devils have a first pairing of Jonas Siegenthaler, I might have said that wrong, I think I said it right, and Dougie Hamilton. Dougie Hamilton may not be having the season that you expected from him. His stats have not looked as flashy as they did in Carolina. His defensive stats haven't looked as flashy, but honestly, I think he will bounce back next season, and he has been dealing with injuries throughout the season, and just stuff has gone wrong for him. And Siegenthaler, a fine defenseman, not fantastic, you know. And really, this is kind of carried by Dougie Hamilton, and partly because I still think that he is a very good defenseman, and I don't think he's having a horrible year. I just think that more was expected of him, and if he was having a better year, they would definitely be higher on this list, and I don't think New Jersey would be having as many defensive problems as they're having. But then you also have to consider that New Jersey also has gone through 7 goaltenders, meaning that none of them have really fit well, none of them have been capable of playing well, and that also kind of has something to say about their lack of defense. But yeah, so I don't blame this all on that defensive pairing. I think some of their defensive stats will be lower because of just the amount of goals that they allow and goaltending not being great. Like, man, they lost 7-6 to Florida, and Florida came back, and a lot of those goals did not look great on Hammond. Some of them were like ones that New Jersey shouldn't be giving up those chances, but there were, especially that 5-hole, or that overtime goal. It was like 5-hole, and that was just rough. But now on to number 16. And at number 16, a team that you might think I have low, it is Toronto. And Toronto has half of an amazing defensive pairing with Morgan Rielly, but then you have Ilya Lyubushkin. Ilya Lyubushkin, I think, is the definition of a third pairing defenseman. You know, he has meh points. His defensive numbers, he's fine. He can play third pairing minutes. But Morgan Rielly really drags this pairing up to 16. Morgan Rielly, in 68 games, has 9 goals, 49 assists for 58 points. And not only has his year been great offensively, but it has defensively. And Morgan Rielly has definitely helped Toronto have a successful regular season, and hopefully leads Toronto to helps lead Toronto. I think you want Austin Matthews to lead Toronto to successful playoffs, because he is probably the most important player. But Morgan Rielly definitely has to be a part of that. And this first pairing also has to play very good. And as of late, you know, they've been pretty good. Their goals against have definitely gone down lately compared to what they were. I mean, they would have gone down no matter what. They were allowing a ton of goals. But they have been winning a lot of games and not allowing a lot of goals recently. And yeah, this first defensive pairing has been pretty solid for them. But now moving on to number 15, and this is where I really think that I can say that defensive pairings will get really solid. Like, both defense are very good at this level, or at least pretty solid in one category or the other, and really help each other be better. And at number 15, I have the New York Islanders to kick this off. Now, the Islanders, if you want to give them a special award for the defense, well, they have the biggest difference in age between the two first pairing defensemen, with Zdeno Chara and Noah Dobson. Zdeno Chara, although he is 45, you know, he's still kicking. Maybe surprised, but he's still going, and he's actually playing pretty solid. He may not be the defenseman that he used to be, obviously, because he's 45, but still playing pretty solid, especially defensively. But Noah Dobson, on the other hand, a very good defenseman, and managing to put up some pretty good points on a New York Islanders team that really struggles to score. And Noah Dobson, I think he is the future of that Islanders defense. I think he will be a better defenseman than he has already shown that he can be. And really, those two together complement each other and earn themselves all the way up to number 15. But now on to number 14. And at number 14, I have the Minnesota Wild. The Minnesota Wild have a defensive pairing of Jonas Brodin and Matthew Dumba. And Jonas Brodin having a solid year again. And Dumba, he was very good for a few years there, and then he kind of declined. And I think it's been long enough since then that the expectations have kind of dropped for him. But overall this year, he's been solid, and both defensemen, very solid defensemen, and worked their way to 14. But now on to number 13, and a team that I think I may have a little bit high, and I've kind of been rubbing the logo for a reason, because it is the Oilers. And I try not to be biased. I try not to be biased with my rankings. But with the Oilers, I think that their first pairing, although they may not have good depth, I think their first pairing is good enough that I can have them here. It was between them and Minnesota for this spot. So if you want to have Minnesota over the Oilers, I can completely agree with that. But I put the Oilers here, not because it was biased. I sat there for a long time thinking about it. I promise I try not to be biased. But with the Oilers, their first pairing is Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci. And Nurse not having a great year offensively. Last year has really proven to be a career year for him. And when they signed that contract after that career year, I said, why? He's got another year left before that contract ends. Wait to see if it was a career year or if he'll be able to do that again. And he certainly hasn't, but he's still been solid enough. And Cody Ceci has really been a surprise signing. When they signed that contract, again, another contract that I said, oh my God, Ken Holland, really. But that one actually has turned out well, and Cody Ceci has looked really good, both offensively and defensively, because you look, and those are some pretty good offensive totals for Cody Ceci. And this defensive pairing, although it may not be the best, I still think it's pretty solid. And if you don't want him here, then tell me in the comments. Maybe you think they should be lower, but I try not to be biased. I try not to be biased when it comes to the Oilers. I try. But now I'm going to flip the page onto number 12. Nope, that's the wrong page. Flip the page. Nope, that's the right page. Okay, on to number 12. And at number 12, I have the Vegas Golden Knights. The Vegas Golden Knights defensive pairing is Brayden McNabb and Shea Theodore. And Shea Theodore proves time and time again that he is a very good defenseman. And man, what a pick for them at that expansion draft a few years ago. I know I'm a little bit behind on saying this, but very good pick. And Brayden McNabb, he's a fine defenseman, not amazing, but can play pretty solid defensively. And overall, this pairing, pretty solid. But now on to number 11. And at the number 11 spot, I have the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars' first pairing defense is Ryan Suter and Miro Heiskanen. And Ryan Suter has been, although again, he's getting pretty old. He's 37 now, and Minnesota bought him out. And all that and whatever. I don't know if it was him or Parise who was really mad that they bought him out. But either way, bought out, and Dallas Stars signed him. And that contract may end up looking bad in a couple years. But as of right now, Suter's definitely pretty solid this season. And he's playing with Miro Heiskanen, and Miro Heiskanen has also been pretty solid this season. Miro Heiskanen's offensive totals might not be quite where you want him, but next year, John Klingberg will be gone. Holy tongue twister right there. And I think Miro Heiskanen's offensive numbers will go up because he should be getting more power play time. I'm not sure if he's that consistent power play driver right now, but I think next year he definitely will be, and his numbers will go up. And you have to remember, he's only 22, so there's still a lot more potential there. But yeah, overall a pretty solid pairing for Dallas, and the second biggest differential in age, if anybody really cares, behind New York Islanders, if anybody really cares. But yeah, and now on to the top 10, and cracking the top 10, I have the Washington Capitals. And the Washington Capitals' first pairing is really carried here by one defenseman, and that is John Carlson. John Carlson has had an absolutely fantastic season as usual, 65 games, 55 points, but his defensive numbers, he may be great offensively, but he's not bad defensively either. And he's always been a guy who I don't think gets as much attention as maybe he should, because every year John Carlson puts in very good numbers, everything. He plays very good. But he's just not good enough that he's Norris candidate, but he's very good, but he's not that good. So I think he's just in that range there where he doesn't get that attention that he deserves. And then you got, on the other hand, Martin Fehervary, who I believe this is his first year up, I'm not sure, but he's been pretty solid for them. And this first pairing, it's fine. We'll see how it goes in the playoffs for them. But yeah, and now on to number 9, and this pairing is actually hurt by injuries. And you may be asking, where are they? And it is the Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers, despite having Aaron Ekblad injured, still have one of the top defensive pairings in the league, I think, with Gustav Forsling, and I believe he was a waiver pickup. And if he was, what a waiver pickup. And Mackenzie Weegar. Both guys have about the same amount of points. Both guys have been fantastic defensively. Both guys, this team, as much as they're so good offensively, and Florida has that dynamic elite offense that can score 4 goals in a minute if they really need to, their defense is not bad at all. And I think that this first pairing is very good. And this is, again, without Aaron Ekblad. Hopefully Ekblad gets back for the playoffs. I don't exactly know when his time for return is, but if Aaron Ekblad was back, I honestly think this would be number 2 behind number 1, who you'll find out later. And I think it's pretty obvious who number 1 is, but again, we'll get to that later. But now moving on to number 8, and in the number 8 spot, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tampa Bay Lightning, again, a pairing that is carried by a defenseman, and that is Victor Hedman, who is with Jan Rutta, but carried by Victor Hedman. Victor Hedman always puts up some flashy offensive numbers, but what people also realize, and I was going to say don't realize, but come on, we all realize it, he's amazing defensively as well. And Jan Rutta, again, fine defenseman, but Victor Hedman really driving this defensive pairing all the way to number 8, so into the top 10. But now on to number 7, and at number 7, I have the Calgary Flames. Now, as some defensive pairings here have been carried by one, Calgary has 2 very solid defensemen, kind of like Florida, but better, I think. They have Noah Hanifin and Rasmus Andersson, and both of these defensemen are having very good years. In fact, Rasmus Andersson is having a pretty good career year. In 68 games, he has 4 goals, 38 assists for 42 points, and he is a plus 21, which is much higher than a good amount of players on the Flames. Not their first line. Their first forward line has like a plus 50. We forget about those guys because they're just miles ahead of everybody else. And then same with Noah Hanifin. Good plus minus, good stats, everything. So both these guys having a career year and really helping Calgary get as many wins as they have and being as solid of a team defensively as they are. But now I'm going to flip the page because we're going to move on to number 6. And at number 6, I have the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers have a defensive pairing of Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox. And Ryan Lindgren, his offensive stats may not look good, but he's so good defensively and really helps fix a lot of the defensive errors that Adam Fox makes. Adam Fox, an amazing top-tier level playmaker, gets a ton of points, and he does make his defensive errors sometimes. And that's really where Lindgren comes in, like I said. So these two are two defensemen who complement each other perfectly and work very well on a pairing. And sadly, I don't think they make the top 5, but very close and a very good pairing. But now on to the top 5, and cracking the top 5, a pairing that's kind of like New York Rangers in that you got a defensive and an offensive, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins, which is actually funny because Pittsburgh is probably going to be very, very likely a team that the Rangers are going to play in the playoffs. But Pittsburgh's defensive pairing is Brian Dumoulin and Chris Letang. And Brian Dumoulin, he's like the Ryan Lindgren of this pairing, where he's very good defensively, very underrated defensively. And then Chris Letang possibly having a career year at the old age of 34, which is very shocking. But Chris Letang has been very good this season. And again, this is a pairing where the guys complement each other, an offensive defenseman and a defensive defenseman, and it just works. It just works really well. But now on to number 4. And remember, if you've been here for the whole video, then you'll know that around the start, I said that the trade deadline, although it hurt Anaheim, it helped the other team a lot. And this is that team because the Boston Bruins come in at number 4 with their defensive pairing of Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy. Hampus Lindholm in 66 games has 5 goals, 20 assists for 25 points, and although they may have paid a lot to get him, and although they may have signed him to a contract that was too much money, this first pairing is still very good. And Charlie McAvoy, on the other hand, pretty much doing what was expected. His offensive numbers have inflated a little bit, but his defensive numbers always been very good, and he's always been a very good two-way defenseman. And really, Hampus Lindholm is a pretty good two-way defenseman as well, a little more to the defensive side. But the trade deadline really helped lift Boston up on this rankings because they definitely care about where they are on my rankings. They're like, oh yeah, Jonah's making his rankings after the trade deadline. They're like, all right, we gotta get another defenseman, good defenseman, and that's exactly what they did. And here they are at number 4. But now on to the top 3. Who is my top 3 defensive pairings in the NHL? And at number 3, I have the Carolina Hurricanes. The Carolina Hurricanes have Jaccob Slavin with Tony DeAngelo. And again, very good defensive pairing. Obviously, they're in the top 3. But Tony DeAngelo, he only played 6 games last year for the Rangers. Obviously, had that bad fallout with them and signed in Carolina for only $1 million. And I think this might be the biggest bargain contract that there is in the whole league. It very well could be. Bunting's up there, but I think DeAngelo might be the biggest bargain of a contract that there is. But either way, he has been amazing offensively and defensively and a really good pickup for Carolina. And Slavin doing what Slavin does, playing that physical game, taking not any penalty minutes while playing that physical game, which is impressive. But playing that physical game and do just very good two-way, and has had a bit of a better offensive year than usual. But yeah, they make their top 3. But now we're on to the top 2. And who are left? Colorado and Nashville. And I think we know who's number 1 again. Now you'll know after I say this, because at number 2, I have the Nashville Predators. Nashville carried by one defenseman, but also they have 2 good defensemen, but one defenseman really gets them up to number 2, and that is Roman Josi, who in 66 games has 18 goals, 63 assists for 81 points, meaning that in his next, 66, 76, that's 10 plus 4 is 14. In his next 16 games, he only needs 19 points to get to 100, I believe, if my math is correct. He only needs 19 points in 16 games. This defenseman could get 100 points in 82 games, in a season, which is insane. I don't even know, I don't think I've ever lived to see that happen. I don't think I've ever lived to see a defenseman hit 100 points. And then Alexander Carrier, he's a pretty good defenseman. Now, I'm not going to say Roman Josi makes a ton of defensive mistakes, because I don't think he does. I think Roman Josi is a very good defenseman both ways. His offensive numbers obviously take charge there, because that's insane. Those are some insane offensive numbers. But Carrier, a bit underrated because he's playing with Josi. Does put up some pretty solid defensive numbers, and sadly they could not get number 1 because number 1 is just too good, and it is the Colorado Avalanche. And I feel like they've been number 1 on a lot of lists that I've done, but Colorado has 2 Norris candidates on their first defensive pairing, and that is Devon Toews and Cale Makar. 2 Norris candidates on 1 pairing. It's insane. And Devon Toews, 50 points in 58 games. Cale Makar, let's see, 75 and 65, and they're just amazing. I don't know how they managed to do this. Like Colorado, I don't know. This is a very well-built team with a amazing first pairing, and there's as much as like Nashville's at number 2, it was not close. Like Roman Josi, great. Carrier, good defensive defenseman. 2 Norris candidates on 1 defensive pairing. Insane. Insane. Absolutely shocked. But thank you guys for watching. If you are still here, 35 minutes to record this one. So however long it is, that's however minutes I cut out of it. Like maybe it's 6 minutes. I don't think I'll be cutting out as much this time because I actually did pretty smooth with it. Maybe what I was saying didn't make sense, but you know, I made it through the whole video without having to pause and unpause the whole time looking at the stats. So that's really nice. It's not often that happens. So again, thank you guys for watching if you are still here. If you did enjoy and you are still here, please maybe drop a like and maybe even subscribe. But yeah, I hope to see you guys in the next video, which I plan on doing players from each team who are having a career year. That's the plan. Whether it happens, I don't know. But expect that, maybe. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. I want to do the cool mic thing right here. What am I doing? I'm going to drop this mic, okay? I might cut that out. I'm going to put the mic down, walk away, and then the video ends. I do this because nobody sticks around for the full video, probably. But yeah, see you guys.